is pretty clear that on the back half of the draft, Aaron Glenn was attempting to tap into a crop of players he could coach and build a culture with. That is what somebody commented on one of my draft videos a couple days ago. Paraphrasing. That's where I get a lot of my video ideas, by the way, is the comments. And I think that's an idea worth exploring. Now, I know the comments, so I could write the top one. Great, we got a bunch of choir boys and Eagle Scouts and who can't play football and 16-year playoff drought and then on and on and on. Yeah, I mean, I can make a disclaimer in every video. I do not predict the Jets to make the playoffs in 2025. But we're just talking about the team, man. And I think that is a component of their draft strategy that we can make an inference about and is worth discussing. So if you're looking at especially, and I would say that's a factor with every draft pick, but once it gets to round 4 and beyond, you're like, all right, where the talent, margin maybe starts to get closer, even as the gaps get bigger, like the gap between player number 5 on your board and player number 30, that's a much bigger difference than maybe player number 186 and like 228 or whatever. So, you know what I'm saying? So I think the later you get into the draft, that the more you want to prioritize character, leadership, building a culture, where in the beginning of the draft, it's like, you got to get a freaking player, man, right? And there's a balance, obviously, that goes throughout the whole draft of those two things. And I'm looking at these picks, and I think that is true. I think Aaron Glenn, there's a good chance with a lot of these players, like Smith in particular, I think that when he met with him, he just saw something in the dude. And he's like, we're going to draft you. He just decided that. And, okay, and he said to F with your consensus boards and your mock drafts. Now, if it works out, it was a steal, 4D chess, all that. If it doesn't, the jokes will write themselves, right? But I do think the character, culture stuff matters, particularly when you're looking at this year, which I just said, I don't predict the Jets to make the playoffs this season. Now, you should never be more than a year away, especially now that there's 7 seeds that get in. There's a bunch of parity in the league. Teams like the Bengals, who you think are a lock, they get bounced. Teams like the Broncos, who people think are going to finish in last place, they make a wild card. So you should never be more than 1 year away in the modern NFL, in my opinion. And I think that should go for any team. So why should the Jets be any different? I think this team should be able to try and make a wild card within the next 2 years, if the new regime is up to snuff. What's their barometer before they lose their job? Probably lower than that, because we give long leashes. Woody, he meddles, but he waits a while until he fires people. So there's that. But I do think that, and of course, you have to win to build a culture. You cannot have a good culture if you keep losing. But I do think the Jets can take steps towards building and establishing a culture this season, even if they don't make the playoffs. They could take steps towards that. Where last year, for a lot of different reasons, I think, obviously the coach being fired was a major blow to the team. So it's hard to say how, not necessarily a blame game or whatever, but Davante Adams came in and said like the just the vibes, the morale was the worst he's ever seen in terms of a sideline and a locker room. And I know he played in Green Bay a long time, but he was just coming from the Raiders, who had the same thing. They had a fired coach and interim coach take over, bad team. So a lot of things were pretty similar in terms of that, like reasons of why the culture should be bad. And Davante Adams was shocked with how broken culturally the Jets were last season. So, man, that's kind of a wake-up call. And now if you're going into a season where, look, you don't expect to win 12, 13 games, we need players who set the standard, who come and work their ass off in practice every day, who come to meetings on time, ready to go. Because you can't have, and we all have jobs, we know this, you can't have it all be top-down leadership. The boss can't watch everybody. It's impossible. You have to, like, if you're in a well-run organization, if you're slacking off, like your coworker or like maybe the manager who's like right above you, or the guy who has your same title but he's been doing it a long time, like whatever, you keep your own standard. You police your own, you handle your own work, right? I remember working in a moving company, and it was like that. Like if you weren't handling your own part of the weight, it was going to be a freaking problem, because that means more shit was going on somebody else's back. So you got to police your own. The boss can't watch everybody. And so, yeah, you got to get guys who come in and have those practice habits, those working habits, to allow Aaron Glenn not to have to be a dictator and to be a self-policed, like self-motivated team. And I think that heavily factored in to some of those picks on the back. And furthermore, look, we can, like, when those picks rolled in, especially the linebacker, I was like, dude, do we just take a special teamer in round 5? Like, could we have not taken a defensive tackle? But we don't know that they don't see him as a potential, like, hey, Quincy Williams is going to leave next year at 29, 30 years old, and we think Kiko is going to be our starting linebacker next year. Like the Jets drafted Sherwood in round 5. Like, they picked up Quincy off the scrap heap. Like, we don't know. In fact, I would argue it's kind of silly to assume that they're drafting these players and they're like, great, we got the next Irv Charles in Smith and the next Chaz Surratt in Kiko. Like, no, the special teams is going to be a way for these players to immediately contribute as they're developing other parts of their game. But I mean, maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't, but they obviously they think there's a ceiling higher than that for those players. Otherwise, you wouldn't draft them in the spots that they did. So I just say that's a component of the draft that I think was probably important to this team. And look, man, we have seen talented players. Elijah Moore and Denzel Mims are ones that come to my mind right away. Players who had the requisite talent, but just didn't have it here. They did not have the whether it be the love of the game or the maturity or whatever the case may be, they didn't have it. And they couldn't make it work. So I think Aaron Glenn's philosophy was, we need some dogs. And we'll see if it works out.